She danced with silence, she danced with pain. In shadows of cold, she broke the chains. They called her cleaner, she wore a crown. With every step
The sun beat down on Maryanne's back as she carried a heavy basin of clothes. Her arms ached, and sweat dripped down her face, but she didn't stop. Every naira she earned from washing clothes in the neighborhood was precious. Her family depended on it. Her mother was not well, and her younger brother, Emeka, needed new school sandals. Life was hard, a constant struggle, but Maryanne carried it with a quiet strength in her eyes. She often dreamed of a different life, one where she didn't have to work so hard just to survive. She wanted to finish her schooling, to make her family proud, to escape the never-ending cycle of poverty. One evening, while talking to her neighbor, she heard about a new job. "They need a house helper for Madame Jane," the neighbor whispered, her eyes wide. "The very rich old woman who lives in that huge house with the high walls. They say she pays very well." Maryanne's heart gave a little flutter. Madame Jane's house was a legend in their area, a place of untold wealth and mystery. It felt almost too good to be true, but her family's needs were too great to ignore any chance. With a deep breath, Maryanne decided. This was a chance to help her family in a big way. She didn't know that stepping into that grand house would lead her to face someone who seemed to hate her right away, making her new job a daily battle. The next morning, Maryanne stood before the towering, black gates of Madame Jane's estate. The walls were so high, she couldn't even see the house clearly, only hints of tall, ancient trees. Her hands trembled as she pressed the intercom button. A harsh voice buzzed back, asking her name. Soon, the heavy gate swung open slowly, making a soft grinding sound. Maryanne walked in, feeling very small on the long, winding driveway. The gardens were perfect, like a picture, but they felt cold and lonely. A strict-looking woman, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Maggie, met Maryanne at the main door. Mrs. Maggie's face was tight, and her eyes looked Maryanne up and down, making her feel even more nervous. "You are Maryanne?" Mrs. Maggie asked, her voice sharp, like a snap. Maryanne nodded, her voice stuck in her throat. She was led into a huge, quiet house filled with fancy, old furniture. It smelled of polish and something old, like secrets. Madame Jane, a very old woman with sharp eyes and a stern face, sat in a grand armchair. She looked Maryanne over carefully, then gave a tiny nod. "You'll do," she said, her voice raspy but clear. "Mrs. Maggie will tell you what to do." Maryanne felt a mix of relief and fear. The job was hers, but the house felt like a beautiful, silent prison. As Madame Jane's eyes rested on her, a strange, knowing look flickered. "And we have a special task for you, Maryanne," Madame Jane added, her voice dropping slightly, "something extra. My grandson, Donald, he needs inspiration. You will help provide it." Maryanne felt a shiver down her spine. Inspiration, she wondered. She didn't know that this special task was part of a secret plan, linking her to the handsome, mean grandson and a hidden agenda. Maryanne's first few days at the mansion were a blur of hard work. She cleaned, she cooked, she polished, always moving, always quiet. Mrs. Maggie watched her like a hawk, making sure she followed every rule. The house was spotless, but it felt empty, like a museum where no one was truly happy. Madame Jane was mostly in her room, giving orders through Mrs. Maggie. Maryanne missed the laughter of children in her neighborhood, the warm chatter of her family. Here, silence was king. Then, she met him. Donald. Madame Jane's grandson. He was very handsome, with a strong build and eyes that sparkled, but his face held a permanent frown. He was always dressed in expensive, stylish clothes, looking like he had just stepped out of a magazine. Maryanne first saw him when she was polishing the grand staircase. He walked down, his steps heavy, talking loudly on his phone. He didn't even glance at her. Later, she accidentally bumped into him in the hallway, carrying a stack of clean towels. The towels slipped, falling onto the polished floor. Maryanne gasped, her cheeks burning. "Oh, I am so sorry, sir," she cried, quickly bending down to pick them up. Donald looked down at her, his lips curled into a sneer. "Watch where you're going, cleaner," he snapped, his voice sharp and cold. He didn't offer to help. He just stepped over the fallen towels, his expensive shoes gleaming, and walked away without another word. Maryanne felt a hot flush of shame, then a prickle of hurt. His meanness was like a slap in the face. She was ready for hard work, but not for such coldness. This was worse than she imagined, and she had no idea it was all part of a deeper, hidden plan by his grandmother. From that day on, Donald seemed to go out of his way to be mean to Maryanne. It was small things, but they cut deep. If she was cleaning a room, he would walk in and purposefully mess it up, knocking over cushions or dropping papers on the floor, then giving her a sarcastic smile. "Looks like you missed a spot, cleaner," he'd say, his voice dripping with unkindness. If she was serving him at the table, he would avoid her eyes, or make a loud sigh as she placed his plate down, as if she was bothering him just by existing. He would always call her cleaner or girl, never her name. One afternoon, Maryanne was carefully arranging fresh flowers in a vase in the living room. It was one of the few tasks she enjoyed, as the flowers brought a touch of color and life to the cold house. Donald walked in, saw her, and his eyes narrowed. He strode over to the vase, picked up one of the beautiful lilies, and sniffed it loudly, then wrinkled his nose in a show of disgust. "These smell awful," he declared, his voice loud. He then deliberately broke off a petal, letting it fall to the clean floor. He looked at Maryanne, his lips twisting into a smirk. "Do try harder next time, cleaner. My grandmother likes things to be perfect." He walked away, leaving Maryanne standing there, her hands frozen, staring at the broken petal on the shining floor. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. It wasn't just the flower, it was his constant disrespect, his cold cruelty that felt like a sharp knife. She wanted to scream, to ask him why he hated her so much, but she couldn't. She needed this job. She swallowed her hurt, her fists clenching, and picked up the fallen petal. Madame Jane, though old and strict, wasn't always as cruel as her grandson. She seemed to observe Maryanne closely, sometimes with a thoughtful look. She had her own strange rules, though. Maryanne was told never to go into Madame Jane's study, a dusty room usually locked. And Madame Jane often insisted Maryanne sit with her while she drank her evening tea, a strange ritual where Madame Jane would mostly just watch her, saying very little. During these times, Maryanne felt Madame Jane's eyes on her, a deep, searching gaze that made her wonder what the old woman was thinking. One evening, as Maryanne served Madame Jane her tea, the old woman tapped her walking stick lightly on the floor. "Maryanne," she said, her voice surprisingly soft for a moment. "You are hardworking. You are patient. And," she added, her eyes gleaming with a hidden purpose, "I hear you have a natural rhythm. A grace. Perhaps you might be interested in helping with a special project for the upcoming charity gala?" Maryanne's breath hitched. "A special project?" Madame Jane continued, "My grandson, Donald, he needs to perform a traditional dance. A very important one for our family. But he is unwilling. I believe you could be the perfect inspiration to help him. You will assist him. You will teach him to dance. You will make him shine." Maryanne's heart pounded. This was the special task Madame Jane mentioned. It felt like a trap, forcing her closer to Donald. But it also offered a strange chance, a way to use her hidden talent. Madame Jane then sighed, a long, weary sound. "He needs someone strong, someone true. Not like the others he brings home. He is troubled. Stubborn." Maryanne realized Madame Jane was looking at her not just as a maid, but as someone who could fix her grandson through dance. This was far more complicated and dangerous than she ever imagined. Despite Donald's constant unkindness, Maryanne started to notice tiny, almost hidden things about him. Sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his stern face would soften as he looked at an old family photo. Or, late at night, she would hear the soft, sad notes of a piano coming from his private living room. It wasn't the loud, angry Donald she knew. It was a different, quiet sadness. She also noticed that Madame Jane, despite her sternness, seemed to secretly watch Donald, her eyes filled with a worry she tried to hide. One very hot afternoon, the air conditioning in the house broke down. The heat was heavy and sticky. Maryanne was struggling to carry a heavy bucket of water up the stairs for cleaning. Her arms trembled, and she felt dizzy. Suddenly, the bucket slipped from her sweaty hands, crashing to the marble floor. Water splashed everywhere. Maryanne gasped, her heart pounding. Just then, Donald appeared at the top of the stairs, looking annoyed. "What was that commotion?" he demanded, his voice sharp. Maryanne froze, ready for his usual harsh words. But then, he saw her, pale and shaking, staring at the huge puddle. For a split second, his face changed. The anger in his eyes softened, replaced by a flicker of concern. He didn't shout. Instead, he just let out a frustrated sigh, ran his hand through his hair, and walked quickly downstairs. He didn't speak to her, but he grabbed a stack of clean towels from a nearby linen cupboard and silently dropped them next to the puddle before walking away. Maryanne stared at the towels, then at his retreating back. It wasn't kindness, not really, but it wasn't his usual meanness. It was a tiny crack in his icy wall, a strange, confusing act that left her wondering if there was more to Donald than just anger. The dance practices began, and they were awkward at first. Donald was stiff, uncomfortable, clearly hating every minute. He would sigh loudly, roll his eyes, and make sarcastic comments. "This is ridiculous, cleaner," he'd grumble, glaring at Maryanne. "I'm a businessman, not a show pony." Maryanne, however, was patient. She knew Madame Jane was watching, and she needed this job. So, she moved with grace, gently showing him the steps, explaining the meaning behind the traditional movements. She chose music that resonated with his earlier sad piano tunes, subtle melodies that seemed to unlock something in him. Slowly, very slowly, Donald began to change. He still complained, but his movements became less stiff. He watched Maryanne with more interest, not just annoyance. One afternoon, after a particularly frustrating practice, he slumped onto a bench, running a hand through his hair. I can't feel it, Maryanne," he admitted, his voice quiet, almost vulnerable. "It's all forced. My grandmother, she wants this so badly. She wants me to settle down, marry, have children. She thinks this performance will show I'm ready to take on the family legacy, to be the man she wants. She says I'm not a complete man until I have an heir." Maryanne's heart ached for him. She saw the heavy burden on his shoulders, the deep desire to please his grandmother, and the fear of failing her. He confessed his past attempts to find love, and how his grandmother always found fault, driving away any woman he cared for. "She says I'm choosing the wrong kind of women. She says I'm too picky. She even hinted that I might not be interested in women at all if I can't find someone acceptable to her to marry." His eyes met hers, a shared burden of unspoken expectations passing between them. Maryanne realized Donald's meanness was a shield, a way to keep people away, a sign of his own deep pain. And the reason for his grandmother's demands, this very dance, was more personal, more manipulative than she first thought. The pressure from the gala, and the deep talks during practice, broke down the walls between Maryanne and Donald. She saw his pain, his loneliness, his desperate struggle to be himself while still trying to please his powerful grandmother. And he, slowly, began to see her not as the cleaner or dance helper, but as someone who truly understood him, someone with a quiet strength he admired. They started talking about their lives, their dreams. He would listen carefully to her stories about her village, about Emeka, about her hopes. One late evening, after a long practice, they were alone in the ballroom. Donald stopped dancing, his chest heaving, but his eyes were fixed on Maryanne. He took a deep breath, his voice trembling slightly. "Maryanne," he began, his voice barely a whisper, "I have to tell you something. My grandmother, she didn't just want me to perform at this gala. She wanted me to meet someone. She wanted me to marry her, and have children. And she hired you to help me. To make me fall for you, to make me want to marry. Because she thinks there's something wrong with me. I haven't wanted to marry since she rejected the last lady I brought home. She thinks I might not be interested in women again. So, she thought you could fix me, make me want to marry and have a family." Maryanne's eyes widened, a wave of shock washing over her. She knew Madame Jane was tricky, but this was a deeper, more chilling betrayal than she ever imagined. She had used Maryanne's family's desperation, and her own grandson's hidden problems, in such a cruel, calculating way. Donald looked at her, his face filled with shame and hurt. I hated it. I hated her for it. But something happened, Maryanne. I genuinely fell for you. Not because of her plan, but because of who you are. Your strength. Your spirit. Your dance. He reached out, gently touching her hand. I know this is a mess. I know she set us up. But what I feel for you is real. And I want to be with you. Not because of her, but because of us. Maryanne stared at him, her mind spinning. The man who had been so mean was now revealing his deepest truth, and his love. The shocking plan was revealed, but a true connection had unexpectedly blossomed from it. What would she do now? The night of the grand charity gala arrived. The huge hall shimmered with bright lights and famous faces. Maryanne felt a mix of terror and a new, quiet strength. She was dressed in a beautiful, special dance costume that glittered with every move, chosen by Madame Jane herself. Her heart pounded with both nerves and a strange hope. Donald stood beside her backstage, his hands secretly holding hers. We'll do this together, he whispered, his eyes full of love and brave decision. Their performance began. Donald, no longer stiff, danced with a new passion, his movements strong and graceful, matching Maryanne's every step. He wasn't just dancing, he was showing his truth, his courage. Maryanne danced with her whole soul, her movements flowing with the story of her hardship, her hope, and her unexpected love. The crowd cheered loudly, feeling the deep emotion in their dance. As their performance ended, the room burst into loud clapping. Donald, still on stage, turned to Maryanne, his eyes shining with tears of love and courage. He took a deep breath, and in front of everyone, he spoke, his voice clear and strong. My grandmother, Madame Jane, he began, his voice echoing through the hall, has long wished for me to marry, to make sure our family name continues. She believes I am incomplete without a child to carry our name. She even went so far as to plan all of this, to make sure Maryanne was hired, not just as a helper, but to fulfill her own wishes for my future. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Madame Jane, seated in the front row, her face turning pale with shock, started to rise, but Donald continued, his gaze fixed on Maryanne. But what she planned as a trick became something real. Maryanne, you brought light to my life, not because of a plan, but because of your true spirit. I love you, Maryanne. Will you marry me, not for my grandmother's plan, but for ours? Maryanne stared at him, tears streaming down her face. This was it. The truth was out. The shocking secret had been revealed by the man she was meant to trick. Her journey from a humble helper to a grand stage, her mean boss turning into a lover, had led to this moment. Her family's future, her own heart, depended on her answer. She knew the problems for Madame Jane would be huge, and their own future uncertain. But looking into Donald's brave, loving eyes, she knew her choice. What happened next, and how their surprising love story defied all odds, will truly shock you and redefine what a fairy tale can be.
She danced with silence, he danced with pain. In shadows of gold, she broke the chains. They called her cleaner, she wore a crown. With every step she turned hate around. Oh, Maryanne, the girl they tried to dim.